This is the Conejotako writing this at 11:38 p.m. on Wednesday. I just managed to send the video about the anime's cut content to the editor, and now I'm writing this to send the production of this video to another editor. Why am I not editing it myself? Because I have a problem that has cut into much of my free time. A family member is hospitalized. Fortunately, medical insurance covers all expenses, but it's still a difficult situation. Regardless, if you notice the editing for this format is a bit different, it's because I'm delegating the work to other people, at least until my mother is discharged. As for today's episode, it's one that leaves me with more questions than answers, and that's because of the vague way Teppei wrote the chapter. I also have reasons to believe that Crusch has received a major power-up, and I will explain this by citing excerpts from the novels, as always. But before we start, a shout-out to the channel members: Juan the Parrot fan, Sam the Cat fan. I don't know what this one is a fan of, but a shout out to Yin, the one who thinks they're a punk, Very Vargas, and finally the Hollow Knight fan. There are no new members on my English channel, so let's get started. Welcome to the analysis of Arc 10, Episode 13. The chapter begins with a brief recap of what happened. That Mikloto is important, that Subaru, Bayako, and Tiga arrived and found many dead, blah blah blah. Betty and Tiga come out to defend Subaru, who was being interrogated by Crusch, who still doubted if he was the real Natsuki Subaru. Then the scene would happen where Crusch openly admits to having killed Mikloto and his guards because they were traitors to the kingdom. And here I want to take a moment to sidebar. Why does Crusch consider Mikloto and his people traitors to the kingdom? I can assure you that until now, Mikloto has never shown signs of rebellion or anything like that. In fact, he went out of his way to bring good results to the kingdom. For example, in EX4, which is a story that takes place about half a year before episode 1 of the anime, it is revealed how Mikloto worked hard to establish a good diplomatic relationship with Emperor Vincent's empire. So, as someone who has read the novels and the references to Mikloto, I can guarantee he is not a traitor. Of course, it's possible that the Mikloto in this part is a fake, one who has already been replaced by Capella. And while I've seen some people out there thinking that Mikloto is Capella in disguise, waiting for the moment to counterattack, I honestly doubt it very much since Betty can smell the miasma in the archbishops. The most curious thing is that I remember Rem could smell that cultists also had miasma. So if this Mikloto is a cultist collaborator of Capella, that also wouldn't make sense because he's supposed to smell like miasma, but Betty doesn't react or comment on that. Anyway, Tiga starts his duel with Crusch while Subaru feels frustrated because he doesn't want another friendship with a beloved person to end that way. In fact, the novel has a nice touch and says that while he thinks about all this, he remembers Al and his promise to want to investigate the mysteries of the world. When the duel starts, Subaru stands there doing nothing and Betty has to come wake him from his trance. It is said that Crusch and Tiga were evenly matched in skill. The most interesting thing is that Tiga is apparently very good with a sword. I'd say the novel version is much more skilled than his version in the Prophecy of the Throne game, where although he also fights, there isn't much emphasis on his combat style. Then Subaru tries to get reinforcements, but Crusch blocks his path, and then he decides to be honest with her and ask her to stop this so he can help her. And so, one of the most interesting parts of the episode would happen, but I think many overlooked it. It is said that in that moment, Crusch launches her attack in all directions, but she didn't aim at Subaru. Rather, the protagonist is only affected by the impact of it. This causes him to lose consciousness and faint. Then he would die. I say this part seemed curious to me because at no point is it confirmed that Crusch was the one who killed him. Maybe someone will say I'm wrong, that Subaru later confirms that Crusch actually killed him, but he only assumes it was her. It's not that he confirms it. And here I want to bring up something interesting. You see, recently the author revealed that Subaru is a terrible narrator, meaning the deductions he makes aren't necessarily exactly what happened. This was reflected, for example, when Subaru doubts that Reinhard is capable of lifting a carriage. He comments on this in the novel when he sees Shaula carrying the carriage in today's anime episode. Or when he said he doubted that Cecilis could do Reinhard's transportation method, which consists of throwing a carriage far away. Subaru doubts the Valachian warrior could do it, but then says that Garfield could. And that's kind of illogical because obviously Garfield is much weaker than Cecilis. It's because of these kinds of comments Subaru makes that I think he might actually be wrong regarding his judgment that Crusch killed him. It could have been Tiga or some other character. I like to believe that eventually it will be revealed that there was a third party involved who ended Subaru's life, but we'll see. Upon returning from death, Subaru realizes that the save point is a bit before Tiga and Crusch start fighting, and the other thing that surprised me about the episode is that the save point also occurs after Mikloto's death. Could we be facing the first case of permanent death in the arc? Honestly, I don't know how to feel. Mikloto had so much left to reveal, and for him to die like that leaves a bad taste in your mouth. I've seen some theorize that Mikloto will be saved because, just as Subaru was able to move his save point further back in time thanks to his reconnection with Satella in Volume 31, the conditions that made this possible are no longer present, so I doubt the actions will be repeated. For now, I stand firm in my belief that the two important characters who died are just copies placed there, and the originals are somewhere else. It is also said that Subaru gains the necessary resolve to stand in front of her and think that he won't allow her to get her hands dirty because of him. So to prevent Crusch from using her trump card, he nullifies the magic within the area with Betty's help. And then, to get out of the predicament Subaru put her in, Crusch reveals her new Draconic Eye, and that's how the episode ends. Honestly, this is an episode I enjoyed because truly, not even I, who have read all the side novels, have the slightest idea about what is going to happen or why Crusch manifested that eye. To think that some people had no faith in this arc because they thought the plot would be predictable since the characters had already appeared in a game. But maybe they've changed their minds now. And now that we've reached the revelation of Crusch's Draconic Eye, that leaves me with some thoughts. You see, in ReZero, Dragonkin already exist, who are descendants of dragons. Clint and Madeline, for example, are descendants of two specific dragons, and they are, so to speak, an improved version of what their parents were. This is reflected in the monstrous strength both Dragonkin showed in the novel, Clint tanking attacks from his previous version, and Madeline only being defeated by the most OP person in her nation and by Garfield, who had to be buffed with Subaru's core Leonis just to have a chance. But what am I getting at with this? Now that Crusch has dragon traits like Clint and Madeline, does it mean she will also be as strong as them? Personally, I doubt it. I think if those dragons reached that level of strength, it was because they already had a great foundation. And while Crusch is a good swordswoman, she still has average strength, or barely above average. I mean, if we pair her with Wilhelm, Theresia, or Julius, she would lose by a lot. Even so, I think she will soon receive a power-up, and I think that because of the part where she removes her eye patch as a measure to deal with Subaru's spell. Besides, poor Crusch, after being Tappei's punching bag for over a decade, kind of deserves some love from the author. But what would her power be? I'm telling you now that I believe what Crusch needs isn't brute force, but something to refine her current skills. The candidate is already good at fighting and perceiving her enemy's intentions. It is said that spirits in ReZero can witness thoughts through mana. In fact, Puck reads Subaru's thoughts when he arrived at the mansion, and while Rem isn't a spirit, her race could absorb large amounts of mana through their horn. And in her fight against Yae, she awakens an ability similar to precognition because she began to read the emotions Yae was giving off against her, thus anticipating her attacks. Then, in a side story about Petra, she shows how with training she can use her sight to perceive people's mana, but of course at a basic level. If you haven't understood it by now, I mean that ordinary people with some training can perceive others' mana. Someone ordinary is Petra. But if someone like Rem or Puck comes along, not only can they perceive mana, but they can also perform a much more precise reading. Puck reading the thoughts of others and Rem reading the emotions of the battlefield to counterattack. But here comes the interesting part. A spirit and a dragon are very different beings physically, but in essence they are the same. They are formed based on odd. I ask you to remember that mana and odd are different things. Mana is what people can take from the environment, but what they take is fixed by their odd. Let's just say mana is something external and odd is something internal. What does this have to do with Crusch? That now that she's showing dragon characteristics, it could be that the odd she can use has changed in her favor, and this in turn allows her to absorb more mana from the environment. But unlike Rem and Puck, Crusch has a card that will allow her to much better use the perceived mana to boost her attacks. She has her Divine Protection, an ability that allows her to take the reading of her opponent's emotions to another level. So, in theory, she could now not only detect her rival's lies or emotions, but she could also go much further. Maybe she can even read minds, and that would be a broken ability. Rom himself commented in his fight against Al that at first he believed the traitor had that capacity, which explained his decisions. Or maybe she just receives a big buff to her physical strength and that's it. But I think if the author wants to buff Crusch and make her a temporary villain, he must give her something that fits her character and not just give her brute force for no reason. In any case, I'll let you know that while I love this theory, it wasn't my work, but that of a friend on Discord who shared it with me. And while it has the necessary foundation to be true, let's remember that in the end, the author has the last word. But to close this part, I really feel sorry for Crusch. She is someone who has not only buried her political career since she received help from the dragon, help that ruined her image as a woman who believes in her own strength, but now suddenly she is forced to accept the strength of a being that, according to Crusch, represents the root of all the nation's evils. The dragon. Lastly, I want to give you a small clarification in case you want to theorize. Remember that the blood that fell on Crusch isn't necessarily the same as the one that seems to have fallen on Heinkel. It's believed that the blood that fell on Heinkel was the blood the kingdom had in its possession, blood pumped from the last seconds of a dragon's life, which in theory would be able to wake up his wife, Luana. But the blood that fell on Crusch seems to have been a different type, one that only Capella knows. I say this so you don't think that just because Heinkel apparently became immortal, Crusch could do so as well. But anyway, thanks for making it this far. I'd like to give you a better perspective on everything that's happening, but this episode was difficult to understand even for me, and I hope Tappei doesn't go back to publishing 2 episodes per day. See ya!